Hello, everyone. I'm Tamara Banks, and welcome to Dialogue Denver DA. Glad you could join us in this new way. We're bringing you this important information and news about the District Attorney's Office in Denver. The coronavirus pandemic has forced all of us to think creatively about how we can keep you informed. So, Beth, it's so great to see you. It's been a while. It's been a minute. How are you? How's your family? Everybody good?
Everybody's doing well. Thank you.
Oh, great. And we have a special guest with us today, Attorney General of Colorado, Phil Weiser. Phil, so grateful to have you on the show with us. Thanks for being with us.
Such an honor to be here with you guys.
You know, unfortunately, when we have a crisis or a situation where we're even in war, people take advantage of those who are suffering. And this is no different here during the coronavirus pandemic. So what we want to talk about in this segment of the show are some of the scams that your offices see rising up during this crisis time. So Beth, let me start with you. I guess the new scam is the stimulus check scam. Tell us a little bit about that. What are people doing to take advantage of folks who are getting or trying to get their stimulus check?
So one of the things that we really caution people about is not to respond to any kind of offer, phone call or text message or email saying that we can help you get your stimulus check. We can get it to you quicker. We can maybe help you get more money. All of that is not true. So all the stimulus checks are being handled through the Internal Revenue Service, and they are based on income when people file their income taxes or they use their tax returns from last year. And it is automatically calculated the amount that the person is owed and either mailed, or if there's a direct deposit link, it's direct deposited into their bank account. So the IRS does not allow or use independent parties to mail checks or try to get checks differently. So just ignore any kind of solicitation to help you get your stimulus check.
Attorney General Phil Weiser, let me get you into this conversation as well. There's been an uptick in fraud that your office is seeing. Tell us a little bit about the kinds of frauds that you're seeing. I understand one of them has to do with travel and vacation and cancellations and refunds, that sort of thing. Tell us what's happening there.
What is unfortunate is that during times of crisis, people can and will engage in deceptive, even outright fraudulent practices. And what we need consumers to know, please be vigilant. If you want to be more educated, go to stopfraudcolorado.gov. That's stopfraudcolorado.gov. We've got some advisories about concerns that you should be aware of, and you can help others be aware of. And if you see such scams, you can report them there so we know about them. With respect to refunds, people need to recognize that they have rights, and if you pay for something and you don't get what you paid for, you should look into what are your legal rights. And in some cases, firms have said, we'll give you a refund, and then they turn out not to give people a refund. Let us know if that's happening to you. They might initially say, oh, it's only been postponed, but then later they may actually cancel it, but not tell you. Part of the painful reality is that consumers who don't advocate for themselves end up worse off. Second painful reality, consumers who are more trusting and who are not vigilant can end up getting taken by people who are, using the proverbial phrase, selling a bill of goods, which are basically not good at all. Talking about it is one thing, but in reality, it doesn't work.
There's another kind of fraud going on as well. I know a lot of folks staying home and shelter in place or safer at home now and shopping online, right? And you think you're in your safe confines of your home. I'm just doing a little shopping while I've got some time on my hands, maybe some early Christmas shopping. But that's a real fertile place for scam artists to go as well. Is that right?
Yes, people need to be aware. This is another theme I would tell. Look for reputable sellers. You might see something online, particularly a social media post, and it sounds too good to be true. Don't take the bait. That's often what they're doing. They're baiting you. The bait might be, oh, this great product you really want, and it's at an unbelievably low price from a site you've never heard of. Stay nervous. Do your homework. The same is true about charity, for example. People might think, oh, I really want to go ahead and support one of these great groups helping to give people food who need it during this time. But they're not careful, and they give it to a site where really it's just a scam operation for the person operating it.
Beth, I know you wanted to jump in there as well. What's happening in the city and county of Denver along these lines?
Well, I would just echo kind of what Phil said, that if you do see a solicitation or an advertisement, it's wise to separately go to that website or check out that website. Make sure that it is legitimate before you actually purchase something. And if you see something that you're not sure about, it's perfectly fine to ask friends, neighbors, relatives, do you know anything about this particular company? And I think that you have to be careful of that high pressure kind of approach. Like if you don't do it in the next 5 minutes, it's gone, right? Well, don't do it in the next 5 minutes. If they're not going to honor their advertised price for more than 5 minutes or a half an hour, there's something fishy going on. So I think that's the main thing. As Phil said, be vigilant, check things out. Don't be embarrassed or shy about if you get a phone call saying, give me your phone number and I'll call you back. So you can call back, see if it's a legitimate number before you make any kind of commitment.
That makes sense. Phil, you had you touched a little bit on the charities that a lot of people feel blessed and lucky and they're able to work, so they want to give, right? So those are the very people that are often preyed upon by these false charities. What's happening there? What does that look like if you get a call from somebody?
So you will often hear about someone who calls you and says, oh, we want you to support this worthy organization. What you can do, and I just thought Beth said it really well, ask them for the information and say, well, I will look into it and get back to you. If there's a legitimate charity, they're not going to quarrel with that. And then one thing you should do is look at a site. There are a few of them, but one is called Charity Navigator. And what they do is they give you ratings and real analysis on these charities. And a lot of times you'll find the purported charity who's reaching out to you isn't legitimate at all. So Beth's point here is crucial. Whatever pressure tactics they're applying, that's a red flag. Do not give in. Second, get the information. Tell them you'll look into it. Third, go to reputable sites like Charity Navigator and figure out whether the purported charity is real.
That's great advice. Sounds like the idea of let me get your number and I'll call you back, right? That's perfect. And of course, everybody now is obviously concerned about their health. So anything that looks like a potential cure or a vaccine, people are jumping onto and paying attention to. What should we know about people who are advertising or soliciting your information, or trying to get you interested in purchasing a vaccine or a pill or a cure-all for COVID-19?
If only we had a cure for COVID-19. I think that's something to be very careful about. I would expect that we will see more attempts to get people to buy products that are advertised as cures or that can prevent you from getting the disease, tests, things of that nature that you can get through the mail. Most of those, if not all, are just fraud. They're just not true. And what will happen is someone will ask for your credit card information, your bank account information. Just don't give that information to anyone over the phone, especially someone who's called you and trying to get you to buy something. Again, you can always say, give me your number, I'll call you back, or do you have some information you can mail to me? I'd like to read about this product. Just take your time and be very careful about it, and don't think that this is a product you have to have. We don't know yet. I mean, there may be tests that are being developed, but we don't know that any have been approved for home use. And I think that's probably an area that will be ripe for fraud, because people are anxious. People are nervous about this disease, and the idea that you can get a cure or something that will help you at home is very appealing. I mean, it sounds great, right?
Right.
So, but we need to be really careful about this. As you know from watching the news, our best experts in the nation are saying there's a lot we don't know yet, and we are having to do long-term research to come up with cures and vaccines. So please don't be susceptible to that kind of approach.
Phil, you wanted to add to that?
I do. What's so frustrating here is there are legitimate companies out there committed to supporting your health. Go to your doctor will tell you who they are. If you get on social media, you'll start seeing advertisements for tests or cures. A lot of them aren't the case. We've actually gone after some entities who are claiming to offer some FDA-approved test, but the FDA hadn't approved it. So don't fall victim to people who are going to deceive you. Go through reputable channels.
And you want to, as you both have mentioned, you want to make sure you know who you're talking to. Well, there's, as you know, there's also scams about people pretending to be someone that you know, a loved one, a great aunt that you haven't heard from in a while. What do those scams look like, and how do we as consumers protect ourselves against that? Phil, I'll start with you.
We see this a lot in our office. We even have a name for it. We call it imposter scams. And the first thing, particularly for older Coloradans, a lot of information about you is on social media, whether you know it or not. People who've put their family trees online, people whose kids are on Facebook with public profiles or grandkids. And then you get a phone call to your landline and someone says, your grandson's here in South America and needs your help. Will you send money? And here's how you do it right now. Well, your grandson might be in South America, might have posted on social media, but doesn't need your help. And the money's not going to your grandson. That's because it's an imposter. And you can play that out over different fact patterns. You can even play it out over someone who sets up a Facebook account, starts a romantic relationship with someone, and then bilks them for, in some cases, more than $100,000. Don't fall prey to these imposter scams. You've got to be vigilant.
Beth, did you want to add to that?
Well, I had an interesting experience when I was speaking at a senior center about this very topic. And at the end of my presentation, I asked for questions and so forth. And this woman kind of raised her hand tentatively and said, I fell for that grandson scheme. One of the things that I think is important, she was brave enough to admit that in front of some other people. But I think what we see frequently is people are embarrassed when they do, respond to one of these scams, so they don't want to report it. And so I really want to emphasize to people that they should not be embarrassed. As I said, these scammers are good at it. This is their job, and they study and they learn and they get better and better. So we want people to report this kind of behavior, even if they have fallen for it, so that we can keep track of that. If possible, we can prosecute them. And I think especially elderly people are nervous about acknowledging when they have perhaps given money to someone, because they are fearful that their children will think, oh, wow, mom really can't take care of her money anymore, so we better, take over. And I think many elderly people live in great fear of losing that independence. So It's another reason that they don't want to come forward and acknowledge that they're getting these calls or that maybe they've responded to one. And so I would love to tell your viewers to please don't be embarrassed about it. A lot of people do respond to these calls, and we need to know about it, and the Attorney General's office needs to know about it so we can help do something about it.
Absolutely right, and that's a perfect spot to end. We could go on for another hour or so on these scams, but I want to thank you both for being here. And one thing to know, Beth, you mentioned our grandparents and our seniors, but it's also the 20 to 29-year-olds. So it's not just folks who might otherwise be vulnerable. I think we're all vulnerable. Thank you both for being here. Beth, you stay right there. Colorado Attorney General Phil Weiser, thank you so much for joining us for this really important information. We appreciate you.
Great to join you guys. Thank you, Beth, for all your great work. Thank you, Tamara.
Thank you.
Thank you now.
We'll be back with more Dialogue Denver DA and COVID-related issues, crime issues, including domestic violence and firearm safety. Back in a moment. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Tamara Banks on this edition of Dialogue Denver DA with Denver District Attorney Beth McCann. And we have another great guest with us today, Maggie Conboy with the Denver District Attorney's Office. Maggie, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Appreciate your time. And I know you've got a very busy job, busier than normal. It's been shocking to me to hear of reports that the fears, and then those fears come to reality of domestic violence on the increase due to the shelter at home. People are stuck at home. Tell me what's happening there. What do our viewers need to know that aren't necessarily in this situation?
Well, I think while we have not seen a dramatic rise since the beginning of the stay at home, we've seen a little bit of an uptick. But the concern is that as people are at home with potential abusers, um, there isn't a safe avenue or an outlet where people feel that they can reach out and seek assistance. And so all of us that are in the domestic violence world right now are being very vigilant about doing what we can to reach out and make services available. But we're very cognizant of the fact that there may well be an uptick when the safer at home becomes more relaxed and people feel that they can get out and find a safe time to seek assistance.
It's so great that your office is being proactive about this because, of course, when we're at shelter at home restrictions, before that, the victims could go to work, go to school, get out and do something and get away until tempers were cooled, right? But now they're not necessarily able to do that, so they probably feel pretty trapped in that situation.
And that's our concern. The message I think that's very important is stay at home does not necessarily mean stay at home if you're being hurt. So, to the extent that people can find another place to go, there are resources out there. There are places that can provide temporary assistance. We're just very cognizant of the fact that sometimes there just isn't that time and place for people to leave right now.
Right, right. And so we often think about domestic violence as physical violence, someone being hit or physically hurt, but there's also some mental head games that can happen, like something as um, simple as keeping hand sanitizer away from the victim to make them feel more vulnerable.
Absolutely. I think that whole idea of power and control, it can be exercised in a variety of ways. Oftentimes, it's far more common to see psychological control, use of isolation, use of children, economic disparity and power, and just that psychological dominance. But yes, to your point, then also taking steps so that someone doesn't feel that they are safe, emphasizing you can't go outside right now or it isn't safe to leave. All of that would fall under that same umbrella of you basically using whatever tools would be in an abuser's toolbox to keep control over a potential victim.
And Beth, I want to bring you into this conversation. Your office has been at the forefront of this and prosecuting domestic violence perpetrators for obviously quite some time. Could you kind of talk about how maybe the victim may feel threatened just to report the incident happening to them?
Yes, of course. I think often people are in a close relationship, an intimate relationship. Sometimes the person who's being abused does not have any other outlets really, and no source of income, no place to stay. So there is reluctance, I believe, because of that dependency and the control that Maggie was speaking about. Also, there's a fear of the criminal justice system and how will that work? What will happen if they have children? Will the children be safe? Will they be taken care of? So there are a lot of things that go through people's mind. And it is a big step to report abuse, but we really want to encourage members of the audience who are in abusive situations to seek help initially and then hopefully report the abuse to law enforcement. But certainly reaching out to places like the Rose Andom Center, which is a center that is designed to assist domestic violence victims, reaching out to friends or family members, because often the abuser will isolate the person, as Maggie mentioned. And certainly during COVID, this is just kind of the perfect situation for an abuser because and it's typically a he, but he can say, you can't go out, or it's dangerous out there, and you will get in trouble. You might get arrested if you go out. It's just adds to the stress level of the person who may be in that kind of situation.
Right. And Maggie, you're on the board for the Andom Center, is that right?
Yes. And lots of discussion, right, about how this is going to look and how we can safely provide services to folks that are able to come in. So, there's a medical clinic there. Obviously, lots of our community partners are there. And so like all businesses and agencies around town right now, trying to figure out different ways to ensure safety, but still being able to do one-on-one and personal interactions when people are able to get there.
And I'm sure it's important to the center as well as the DA's office to provide accurate information for a victim who might be being victimized by being told misinformation about the pandemic, about coronavirus, about COVID-19, because that can be quite manipulative. And the person, if they're so restricted, can't get out of the house, can't maybe restricted from watching TV or reading the news, they may be getting some really bad information, right?
Yes. To think that someone would weaponize information about the COVID virus is particularly upsetting because, right now there's a lot of information about it for even the average person who's able to access all the different sources of information. But absolutely, it could easily be used as another tool. And to the extent that we're able to help dispel any of those myths or misinformation, most definitely. So,
and I just would like to add, typically, Tamara, you have people who may observe it and report it, and that's really restricted during this kind of virus situation where people are told to be at home. So someone who's being abused is not going to the doctor, maybe is not seeing his or her friends to talk about what's going on, isn't really out in the community in the sense that someone might see evidence of abuse and report it. So we also are confronting that kind of situation, and we have certain types of people who are required to report suspected child abuse, for example. Those people are not being seen right now. So we also are concerned about that as well.
Absolutely. I also want to bring in the conversation around firearms, and they should always be locked up in a safe place where people who are vulnerable, like children, don't get to them. But that's something to really consider during this pandemic too, as we speak about domestic violence. Maggie, you want to address that a little bit?
we have our firearms relinquishment program. So we've always been acutely aware of the escalation and lethality that occurs when you pair a domestic abuser with access to firearms. And so, yes, the message could not be any more strong than right now when you've got people shut up and locked up together in the home, that safe storage is critical. Oftentimes when we have those domestic violence homicides is usually how that ends, but a domestic violence shooting, it's something that just happens in a split second, a nanosecond. And so if there is some ability to stave off that quick rise during a domestic violence altercation, certainly a good start is having those guns locked up so there's not immediate access.
Well, and Sharon, also, we're talking about domestic violence, but I know people are starting to feel a little bit overwhelmed with the whole situation, and that gun may be turned on themselves, as a way to get out of the situation and suicide. Beth, you want to address that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about access to guns, and we think of it in terms of mass shootings or homicides, but in fact, the statistics show that it is more likely that someone will commit suicide if they have a gun in the home. So I think percentage-wise, it's much greater, the suicide rate. And it's, as Maggie was mentioning, it's that kind of split-second thing. So if you don't have access to a loaded gun, you're not going to do it. But if you have that access and you're in one of those, episodes, psychotic episodes or depressive episodes, and you have access to a gun, it's just more likely that you're going to use it. And I think that's something that we really want people to be cognizant of and think about when they have family members, for example, who suffer from depression or have anxiety or have post-traumatic stress disorder. Is it really appropriate for that person to have access to a loaded weapon? And we've also seen, children get into guns that their parents have and just end up in terrible tragedies. We just had that one up in Westminster where I think the little boy killed his sister with a gun that was there in the house and accessible. So people really need to store their guns safely, make sure that the kids don't have access. I think we say to people, you just should assume that your children know where your guns are. I mean, it's kind of like what we call in civil law, the nuisance attraction. Kids are attracted to things like that. It's kind of fun. But often the consequences are just terrible and horrific. So we really encourage people to be careful with their guns. I mean, you probably know this, Tamara, but in Denver, in Colorado in general, there's been a huge increase in the number of firearms that have been purchased since the COVID virus became prevalent. I mean, by the thousands, where the FBI or CBI background checks have increased. So again, you've got people in anxious, tense, stressful situations, staying at home. They can't go out. They can't do their usual athletic activities or go to the mountains or whatever it is they do. And then having the gun enter that equation is not healthy.
Right. Well, we're out of time. I know we could talk more about this with domestic violence, but the point is that there is help out there. Stay at home or safer at home, shelter at home, social distancing doesn't mean you have to be a victim. Also, while we're talking about it and thinking about it, don't leave a gun in your car. We've seen an uptick in car thefts recently. So make sure you're not leaving any weapons, any firearms in your vehicle, because if it gets stolen, we know that's going to create a lot of problems for some innocent people. That's all the time we have right now. I'm Tamara Banks. Thanks for joining us on this edition of Dialogue Denver DA. Thank you to Maggie Convoy. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And thanks, Beth. Great to see you again. We'll see you next time.